Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for our 30 on Thursday, Security and Governance in Yammer. Our 30 on Thursday webinar series is a bi-weekly 30-minute SharePoint webinar series where we talk all things Microsoft SharePoint. Our next webinar will be 5 ways to engage your customer with Kentico ECM. It'll be on May 7th, same time, 9:30 to 2 Eastern Time. You can see our full schedule of webinars at sharepoint.protiviti.com/webinars. Protiviti is hosting the SharePoint Project Management Symposium on June 15th in Reston, Virginia. There's 4 sessions and 1 PM roundtable. PMPs can earn 7 PDUs at this event. There's going to be great prizes, food, and networking opportunities, and registration is only $99. If you're interested in learning more about this symposium, please visit our website, sharepoint.protiviti.com/PM Symposium. We are doing live tweeting today during the webinar. Please tweet us your questions and feedback at ProtivitiSP and use the hashtag 30TYammer. Today's session is being recorded. You can access the recording of today's session and an archive of all of our past sessions on our website. For questions during the presentation today, we're going to save them all until the end. You can insert them in the GoToMeeting toolbar in the question window, or you can tweet us your questions again using the hashtag 30TYammer. Our topic today is Security and Governance in Yammer. Our presenter is Maggie Swearingen with Protiviti, and I am Julia Marple, and I will be moderating today's session. So let's get started. Maggie, I'm going to make you presenter. You can take it from there.
Julia. Hi everyone, my name is Maggie Swearingen. For those of you who don't know me, I am an experienced architect and senior manager at Protiviti. In my spare time, when I am not reorganizing the information architecture on websites, I am very, very interested in social media and in particular Yammer and its growth and development in the Microsoft suite, if you will. Last year I went and got 2 Yammer certifications, so I am a certified Yammer power user and a certified Yammer administrator. So today we are going to spend a little bit of time talking about Yammer Security and Governance 101. So the funny thing about Yammer Security and Governance 101 is there's probably not even a 102 session. What's interesting about Yammer is you don't have a lot of configuration options when it comes to security. Microsoft handles a lot of that for us, and they're very open about their security policies and the procedures that they've put in place to protect data in Yammer. But because it is a cloud-based application, we don't actually have a ton of control. But we'll spend some time walking through the site today and highlighting the pieces of control we do have. So I hope everyone can see my screen. Right now I am in my Yammer site. It's not a very busy site these days because it is just a demonstration site. But I want to call everybody's attention to a couple of sections that we're going to be looking at today. I am what is called a network enterprise admin. I'm a verified admin. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But what you'll see over here down in my left is all of my administrator tools. If you're an administrator in your network, you will have these tools available at your disposal. Certain types of admins have more control than others, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So you might actually see little locks next to some of these if maybe you don't have access to administer that certain section of the configuration. Also, over here, that's as far as network administration goes, and that's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. But I do want to talk a little bit about group administration too. So as you can see, I'm in my demo group, and I just clicked the little gear next to the title, and I am a group admin in this case. So anyone who creates a group automatically becomes a group admin, and you can see they can add and remove other admins. They can add and remove members of their group. They can send announcements to their entire group or mark official content in the group. and they can control who can join it and who can view the content. So you want to, as a part of your governance planning process, you are going to want to work with your group admins and set expectations with them about the types of groups that they can manage, what they should be doing to set up their group, and how they should be managing and monitoring the content over time. And we're going to talk about that all in a bit here. I'm actually going to flip over to my presentation for a minute. And the first thing I really want to talk about is admins, because I think if you begin to understand the administrative hierarchy in Yammer, then you pretty much begin to understand the security and governance options you have in Yammer. So the highest level admin is a verified admin. Verified admins can do anything in your Yammer environment, including but not limited to a lot of development activities. So you probably won't have very many verified admins. In our environment here, we only have 2. You want to keep that pretty locked down from a governance standpoint, because verified admins do have as much power as you can possibly have in a Yammer environment, and they are the highest level. The next level down is a network admin. So for all of your various networks, including your external networks, which we'll talk about in a little bit more depth in a minute, external and internal networks can have network admins. The next slide I'm going to show you actually breaks down the types of activities that network admins can do versus the types of activities verified admins can do. Network admins do have a lot of power in your community. So while there will probably be more than one per network, you do, again, want to be very careful about who you make a network admin, because they have a great deal of control. And then the lowest level of admin is what I just showed you, is the group admin. And as you could see, group admins can control what goes on in their group, but other than that, they really don't have very much power in the wider Yammer community beyond their own little group. So group admins can manage just what we just looked at. I do want to call out market official. I think market official is a really interesting feature of Yammer, and it's something that in a lot of our SharePoint implementations comes into play a lot, and Yammer actually handles this really gracefully. What often happens is that there's a document or a piece of content on the site that is the document of record, and we want to call attention to that. So if something else comes up in search, that's fine, but we want to call attention to the latest and greatest, that document of record. Yammer allows group admins and network admins and verified admins to do that by marking content as official. And once you mark something as official, it gets a star and it comes up as official in the search results. And that's just a really cool way, in my opinion, to handle that issue of that, the document of record, because that's something that we have a hard time often in SharePoint implementations handling. So what can verified and network admins both do? Well, you can see that they have a lot of power. They can configure the network settings, set the design, create the usage policy. We're going to look at that more in depth in a minute. Configure defaults for users, configure profile fields, grant and revoke other admin privileges, block users, delete any message. That's key. That is a question I get all the time from clients. Can we delete messages in Yammer? Yes, network and verified admins can indeed delete messages, which is a really, really important security and governance feature. They can also see all the unlisted groups. So if a group admin chooses to make their group private, that's fine, but they need to understand that the network and verified admins can still see those groups in the directories, whereas other admins or other users won't be able to see them. And they can invite anyone, including outside guests, to join their various networks. This really comes into play when we start talking about our external networks more in depth in a minute. Verified admins, like I said, they're the highest level of power, so they have additional features that they can implement. They can bulk update users. They can perform integrations, make sure that Active Directory sync is turned on from a profile standpoint, integrate with SharePoint, SSO, all sorts of back-end technical features, the verified admins have the capability to complete those activities. They can also set the keywords that we monitor, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. They can set the data retention policy, and we'll talk more about what that means in a minute. They can export data, which is a really, really useful way to keep tabs on your content in Yammer. They can read messages in any private group, and they can configure all of the security settings. So verified admins really do have the key to the kingdom. They can do just about anything in Yammer that Microsoft allows us to do. So let's talk a little bit about managing our users. From a governance standpoint, this is usually the biggest fear of organizations. Yammer is kind of like a big party. Once you open the door for the party, people will come in. You need to make sure that you have appetizers and drinks and plates and knives and forks and spoons just the way you would with any other party. So everything really, really should be in place before you launch your Yammer community, because once people start coming in, they won't stop coming in. You want to make sure that your governance is in place already. You want to make sure that it's been communicated to the wider audiences and that people really understand how you're using this application. You also want to figure out exactly how you're going to get your users into the site. Are you going to do a bulk update? Is there an Active Directory sync that's actually happening? Are we letting the network grow very organically and just allowing people to invite coworkers via the network? However you want to handle that is going to be very, very important as a part of your launch. The other thing that you really want to think about is external networks, how you handle external networks. There are organizations who completely turn them off. They don't allow their users to use them. There are other organizations who say you can use them, but only admins can add them, and the admin will okay them and invite all of the users. So if there's a really good business case for external networks, and I've seen several in the past few years, then I would recommend that you use them, but that you really lock them down. The other thing to plan for is which domains you're going to allow in your Yammer network. This is a bit more of a configuration consideration than maybe a security or governance consideration, but I do still want to bring it up. There are a lot of organizations that have multiple domains. There are a lot of parent companies that have children companies that have their own domains. How are you managing that? Are they all having their own external networks in your wider parent network? Are you all going to be a part of the wider parent network? Those are things that you'll want to think about before you launch your Yammer network so that you can make sure that it's configured properly, and in the long run you're going to be able to sustain growth in the network. So we talked a little bit about managing external network, but here's some reasons, some pluses and minuses, in my opinion, with them. They do help you collaborate and connect with users outside of your domain. It's a very, very easy way to do that. One of the things that I love about Yammer is that it really doesn't require any training. The fact that there is such a thing as a power user certification is almost laughable, in my opinion, because anyone would be able to use this without any training and certainly without any certification. So it's really interesting to me how quickly people pick it up. So that means that it's really, really easy for groups to use if they're collaborating externally. One of the best cases I've seen for it is a client of ours from a few years ago. They're a large retailer. They were actually using their external networks in the various stores out in the field where their product was being displayed. So what the users would do is they would go out to the store and they would review the displays, and if they saw any issues with the way the product was being displayed in the retail store, they could snap a picture, they could post something to the Yammer feed. Those messages went right back to corporate and they were handled immediately. And it was a very quick way for these users who were out in the field who basically just had their mobile phones to track issues in retail stores all across the nation. There are also, external networks are really easy to set up. It's just one click of a button. which, you know, for a lot of us is something that strikes fear in the heart of administrators. But from an end user standpoint, it's a really wonderful thing, and it's a great, easy-to-use tool. What you do want to watch for is that users have a solid understanding of the content and that those networks are monitored with extra attention to detail. And a verified admin will be able to do that, or a network admin will be able to do that, depending on the type of network it is. So we would ask them to in our governance plan, and we would set that expectation that if they are going to have an external network, that's something that they need to consider. So one thing that's interesting about Yammer is that I think the definition of security in Yammer gets a little bit blurred for a lot of organizations. To a lot of organizations, security means the security of their intellectual property. To other organizations, it means the security of their data. And then there are some organizations to whom both is important. What we want to talk about is Yammer does give you some opportunities to secure or manage, at least monitor, your data in Yammer. What it doesn't necessarily give you the ability to do very easily anyway is to monitor the flow of your intellectual property. So, you know, when you are working with your organization and when you're setting up your Yammer implementation, it will be important to discuss these two topics and what they really mean to your organization. There are some organizations who just flat out say there is no data such as PII or financial information or healthcare information or anything like that that will ever go in Yammer. That's part of our governance policy. There are organizations who say that's okay, we will help, our productivity will become better, but we're going to set up some keywords and monitor that information and make sure that it doesn't, it's not explicit and it doesn't go out to the wrong people. So there are a few ways to handle that, but I think it'll be important that you work with within your organization and discuss what is your definition of intellectual property security and what is your definition of actual data security, and how are you going to set up your Yammer network to facilitate that. We're going to talk a minute about the privacy policy, so I'm going to flip through that really quickly. We'll come back to that. So what can you do? Well, you can monitor keywords, restrict IP addresses, set password policies, export data, and institute data retention policies. So let's take a quick look at that over in Yammer. Here I am in my Yammer admin panel, and I'm just going to go ahead and click on the Success Center. The Success Center actually gives us all of our various administrative sections here. Your Success Center is a launch page that helps you set up your network effectively. Right below that is your basic network configuration. So some interesting things here that you would want to pay attention to. Do you allow external sharing? Do you allow the implementation of third-party applications? There are several applications out there that will help you plug into Yammer. There's a very effective Salesforce one, which I personally have not used, but I've heard that it's wonderful. There are some other applications out there. You can decide as a network admin whether or not you're going to allow the use of those applications and to what extent you're going to allow the use of those applications. So that's something you want to think about. You know, video players, leaderboards, RSS feeds, all of this is just in the basic configuration of each individual network. In Yammer, there's a parent network called your internal network. That's your basic domain. So in this case, ours is protoso.net. And then below that are all of your groups and or external networks. So that's the relationship that you have here. So this basic security is here for the Protoso domain. Also, you can set additional admins. So you can see here we have actually several administrators in this environment because it is a demonstration environment. You can also appoint additional ones very, very easily, and you can remove people very, very easily. One interesting note, if you are a global admin in an Office 365 environment, you will be a verified admin in your Yammer network by default. So if you are an organization with that sort of setup, be aware that the people who are global admins in the 365 environment will be verified network admins in Yammer. There's actually no way to undo that unless you want to remove the person from being a global admin in your 365 environment. So that's an important little note there. Usage policy. So for most people, when you go to a session where there's any discussion at all about Yammer governance, the big discussion is usually centered around the usage policy. You have a few controls that you can put in place with the usage policy. You can require users to accept the policy, and you can require them to re-accept when changes are made to it, very similar to iTunes. You can display it on every page in the sidebar. Anybody who works in a social media environment, particularly with Yammer, will tell you that this policy should not reinvent the wheel. Use the HTML in here to go ahead and link to other social media and data sharing policies that you already have at your organization. The recommendation for Yammer usage policies is that they're usually short and sweet, but that they obviously link to whatever legalese you need to link to make sure that this is acceptable in your various environments. External networks, so I had mentioned earlier that you can set it so that only administrators can set up external networks. For the majority of organizations that I work with, I would recommend that you start out that way. If you undo that over time and loosen it up over time, I think that's a wonderful thing. But for a lot of us, that's a big fear point, is opening this up to the outside. So if we can keep it under control of people who are administrators and who know when we would want to have an external network versus when we wouldn't, I think that that's usually a better practice. So there's a lot here in the administrator panel, and we're unfortunately in 30 minutes not going to have time to go through all of it. But I do want to point out a few key things. I had mentioned earlier monitoring keywords. So when you monitor keywords, this is particularly useful. You can monitor phrases, and you can monitor things like expressions for credit card numbers, social security numbers, any sort of data that you would want to keep tabs on, you can monitor. When something flags this, an administrator gets notified immediately, and the item is put on hold until the administrator takes a look at it. So this is a very useful way to monitor your content. I was speaking with a colleague recently, and he was also talking about the export data functionality as a way to monitor content. So you can create data exports and then use third-party applications outside of Yammer to actually review the data and review the content and make sure that everything is clean and that nothing is in violation of any of your policies or standards. It's a little bit of a roundabout way to monitor your content, but it can prove to be very effective and to still allow your organization to have this sort of informal learning community available to them. So that's something else that's also available to you. Security settings, so I mentioned earlier that you can restrict IP ranges. Very, very powerful, particularly if you wanted to restrict it so that it can only be accessible from your office or from a VPN. Also, you have a lot of flexibility with password policies. You can make users put together some pretty sophisticated passwords for Yammer, and you can make them have to update them relatively frequently. So, you know, for organizations, particularly organizations who are interested in using external networks, I would advise using very strong passwords and having people reset them relatively frequently. That helps mitigate the chance over time that someone's going to get a hold of someone's password and log in, somebody who don't want to be a part of this, especially if we're opening it up outside of our organization. And data retention policies. Data retention policies in Yammer are quite a bit simpler than they are in SharePoint. Anybody who's dealt with data retention in SharePoint can attest to that. There are really just two choices. One is a hard delete where all of the data is permanently removed and not available in data exports any longer. And the second is a soft delete where it's removed from any view of the users but would still be exportable. Microsoft, as you can see, recommends the hard delete. That wipes out the data. So over time, when you are deleting content, if you are an administrator and you have permission to delete content, it will be gone. There won't be any recourse to get it back. It's up to you. most people would say that you shouldn't be deleting a lot of content out of Yammer, but there will be times when you want to. So you'll want to set this data retention policy to make sure that what you want to happen with your data is actually what's happening with your data. One more thing here, bulk update users. This is a great mechanism. You can upload full sets of users just using a CSV file. This is really useful in particular if you have an external network and you're inviting large amounts of people from other domains. This isn't probably something you would use for your own company because you'll probably have Active Directory sync in place and some sort of single sign-on in place so that users can go ahead and log in without having to do this bulk update. But I did want to point that out too. So you have a lot of options when it comes to security and governance in Yammer. They make it pretty straightforward. It's just this one screen. You don't have a ton of choices, but it can be useful. And if you have creative security issues, a lot of times you can find ways around them using different combinations of the settings that I just showed you, and maybe some creative options like the one my colleague brought up about using the data export and using a third-party program to kind of go through that content on a regular basis just to verify that it's all safe. So within all of that, you shouldn't feel afraid to be using Yammer. What you do want is that your verified admins understand all of this and their different options and the way it works, and you want to make sure that it's configured for your organization right out of the gate. So with that, I'll pause. We only have a couple minutes left here, and I'll see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Maggie. We do have a question about the recording. The recording will be posted on our website, sharepoint.protiviti.com/webinars. Another question is, how does restricting IP addresses work when users are accessing Yammer from mobile devices?
Great question. So right down here, what happens when someone tries to log into an application from outside the IP range? That would fall under the mobile application criteria. You can allow them to log in, which means that your users would be allowed to use the Yammer app to correspond to their, to communicate, or you can deny it. So you can go ahead and restrict the range, but you can also allow some flexibility from within your restriction. Typically, organizations who would go so far as to restrict the IP range would also deny the login from mobile devices for that extra layer of security. But it's really up to you, and you can go either way. Any other questions?
Okay, great. If you have any questions, please insert them in the question window. We are right at the top of the hour. And I think that's all we have for today. Thank you, Maggie, for presenting. We really appreciate it. Thank you all for attending today. We'll see you in 2 weeks where we will be talking about the Kenticos ECM. Thanks, Maggie.
Thanks, Julia. Bye, everyone.